green card holders who give birth to a child overseas, some service members who are not U.S. citizens, and there are many. To be clear, children in both of these situations that I previously described still have a pathway to citizenship here. Again, this is a paperwork change. The difference is just in which form their parents need to fill out. Joining me now is Natalie Dowzicky. She's a writer for Young Voices, an immigration policy writer particularly, so this will help us understand things a little bit here, Natalie. This was confusing, to say the least, when this was first announced yesterday. Some sort of misleading reports about what was happening, others that were not particularly clarifying. So just set the record straight for us. What is this policy change?
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to start off by saying this is not an elimination of birthright citizenship for two U.S. citizen service members who are serving abroad and have a child while they are out of the country. The acting director of the U.S. CIS even stated today that it'll affect approximately 20 to 25 people this year. Mainly the first group of people it's going to affect are the service members we have who are not U.S. citizens. So they are immigrants to our country, which there are quite a few of them, service members who have green cards who then go and serve abroad. So that's the main takeaway. The freak out happened for birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship is not disappearing for U.S. military families.
What about service members who are overseas, who adopt a kid overseas who is not a U.S. citizen?
So when you say U.S. service members, do you mean U.S. citizen service members, or
Yes.
do you mean
U.S. citizen service members overseas?
Yes. So U.S. citizen members overseas who adopt a child while overseas, they have to then apply for the child to go through the naturalization process. Before, they had two options. The child could either apply for a green card or for to go through the naturalization process. Now the child only has one option, which is a naturalization process that the parents will have to complete.
So I wonder why this policy change was needed. What has USCIS identified as an issue that needed smoothing over?
So from my understanding, and mind you, a lot of immigration law is very dense. It's very hard to read. A lot of our processes have been added to and been edited, and it's very complicated, and it's very hard for any one particular person to do it on their own. From my understanding is that there is a discrepancy between the USCIS and the State Department about who was considered residing, and I put that in air quotes because we used to consider a service member who was a U.S. citizen as residing in the U.S. even if they were deployed outside of the U.S. However, there have been some issues with children applying for passports through the State Department who are children of these green card holder service members. And the State Department was denying them passports because they did not have proper either green card and or proper U.S. citizenship. So the definition the State Department held versus the definition that USCIS held was different. So now they're just trying to streamline the paperwork, from my understanding, and that we essentially, our agencies are talking to each other, which in theory is probably a good thing, that we don't have different standards for compliance.
Are there other areas where USCIS is looking at potential discrepancies between the ways that agencies interpret immigration law that might need further adjustment?
So not that I'm aware of. However, I do think that it's not a coincidence that it's something having to do with family-based immigration. We do know that Trump is a fan of merit-based immigration. He has made it very clear that that's kind of his preference. And I think even though this only affects a very small sector of our U.S. servicemen population, I think it is no surprise that it's an attack on family-based immigration.
Does this mean, are there loopholes here, or is it written into the policy change itself that there are instances in which someone who is currently considered a U.S. citizen would lose that citizenship?
So if the U.S. citizen is on U.S. soil right now, there's no loophole. At least, mind you, this came out yesterday, so I'm sure at some point there's going to be a lot more analyzation and people are going to get down to the nitty-gritty and find some way for there to be a loophole. However, there is an important thing to mark that essentially, if the child needs to apply for the green card, or I'm sorry, go through the naturalization process abroad now before they're 18. So this will create some issues with children now who are the child of either a parent with a green card or non-U.S. citizen, or two parents with green cards that are service members living abroad, that they will have to go through the naturalization process, and say they're a teenager already. That is going to be need to finish before they're 18. The naturalization process is a very long and onerous process. I think an important takeaway from this, and yes, we have seen immigration in the limelight, especially since Trump has been president. We all know that he was on an agenda to build his wall. And I think now the media is heavily scrutinizing any and everything that's affecting any type of immigration. And I do think at first the media definitely overanalyzed and, let's say, kind of pulled the horse a little bit too far. I was seeing reports that all U.S. military families who have a kid that was born abroad is no longer a U.S. citizen. And I think we just need to keep careful consideration for, one, what we're reading and listening to, and honestly give time for the directors of agencies and the integral players involved to voice who and isn't affected before we have a big blowout over something that honestly is only going to affect 20 to 25 people per year, according to the acting director.
Especially, as you mentioned, Natalie, when it's something so dense and complex, and we get it on a otherwise busy Wednesday afternoon, and not everybody has time to sit down, read it, understand what it means, and then accurately report on it. So
Exactly.
We appreciate you coming on and doing that for us here today.
Thank you.
Natalie Dowzicky with us from Young Voices. Natalie, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Our thanks to Natalie for spending a little time with us earlier today. Meanwhile, this scrutiny, as Natalie mentioned, of the Trump administration's immigration policy, this nitpicking of every little thing that changes, coming at a time when significant changes are happening to the U.S. immigration policy broadly over the last couple of months and couple of years. We have seen overflowing detention centers at our southwest border. One of the things that the Trump administration has tried to do to stave that off is implement its so-called Remain in Mexico program, which has forced migrants to wait on the Mexico side of the border while U.S. courts process their asylum claims. Well, now dozens of senators have sent a letter to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo calling on the administration to scrap that policy. This coming at a time when the Trump administration has pulled millions of dollars from FEMA's disaster relief fund to put toward ICE. About $155 million from FEMA's disaster relief fund going to ICE. That money apparently going to be used to pay for temporary hearing locations for migrants waiting in Mexico while the courts process their claims. What do those temporary hearing locations look like? And how could they make the asylum process even more complicated? The New York Times reports.
More than a dozen new tents have popped up at 2 locations along the U.S. border with Mexico. These are temporary courtrooms for migrants who are claiming asylum. They offer a glimpse into how the Trump administration's unprecedented crackdown on immigration is playing out, with judges deciding the fate of hundreds of asylum seekers via video and in makeshift facilities. We pinpointed their locations in satellite